And welcome everyone to a good place where truth and integrity meet. Every week, I introduce you to thought provoking and compelling premier educators, politicians, whistleblowers, bestselling authors, journalists, activists, and celebrities. They all have one thing in common: they are people of truth and integrity, and many are considered modern day heroes. The person I'm interviewing today, I would put her in that category. It's my pleasure to share with you today Fritzi Horstman. In addition, I have my dear friend Jesse, who will be sharing his experience of his incarceration. And today we're going to talk about uh, prison reform, but more importantly, how psychology can be used to assist prisoners for growth, for just becoming a more balanced person to prepare them for life outside. And so Fritzi Hortzman is the founder of executive director of the Compassion Prison Project, an organization dedicated to bringing compassion, childhood trauma awareness, and creative inspiration to all men and women living behind bars. She directed Step Inside the Circle after working with 30 incarcerated men while living at Kern Valley State Prison for over a year and learning about the extent of their childhood trauma. A few months later, a friend of hers posted on Facebook that he had visited a maximum security prison and that the rate for the program that he volunteered in was about 5%. I found this extremely interesting and signed up on September 18th, 2018. She walked into Kern Valley State Prison with an organization called Hustle 2.0 and met 100 quote unquote violent offenders. Fritzi produced HBO's The Defiant Ones, directed by Alan Hughes, which premiered July 9th, 2017, and has garnered several awards, including IDA Best Limited Series and AACP Outstanding Director in a Television Movie or Special, Grammy for Best Movie Film, Best Music Film, sorry about that, and was nominated for 5 Emmy Awards, including Best Documentary. Her first feature, Take a Number, which she wrote, produced, and directed, debuted in the Slam Dance Festival in 1997. She served as a co-producer and post-producer on numerous features and documentaries for Paramount Network Television, Universal Television, VH1, UPN, Lifetime, Showtime, FX Networks, the CW, and CBS, including the acclaimed The Day Reagan Was Shot, Our America, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2002. Edge of America, which premiered at Sundance in 2004, and Lila and Eve, which premiered in Sundance 2015. She directed several short documentaries, one of which was Downtown, won an award at the USA Film Festival. She directed documentaries on James Joyce entitled Joyce to the World, featuring Brian Dennehy, Frank McCourt, and Finola Flanagan. Fritzi is passionate about equality, civil rights, education, and stories about justice. It is in her life's work to make sure that these stories get told. Fritzi studied at New York University Summer Film Program and received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film and English from Vassar College. So welcome, Fritzi. You had quite the bio, and that's me just pulling the most important things, in my opinion, just to celebrate you as a person.
Ella, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, well, I guess one of the first things we should do, a great starting point would be to start with your, we discussed your educational background. So I think your area of expertise as well as your work history to help listeners understand who you are and become more familiar with you.
Well, Ella, I guess my area of expertise has been a filmmaker for the past 30 years. But 3 years ago, when I walked into a prison, I pivoted and just became obsessed with childhood trauma and the effects of trauma on the brain, body, and spirit. And once I found out that I was traumatized, I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which I highly recommend. Once I realized that I was traumatized, it changed the way I felt about myself. It was like I got a fresh start. It's like I understood what trauma did to me and that my behavior was not who I was. And when I walked into those prison doors, all I saw were 100 wonderful men that were traumatized, that were being punished and demeaned and dehumanized, when really all they needed was some trauma help and someone to take care, someone to be concerned about them, someone to see them as humans and not as animals. And I think that's an imperative for our society, because when we dehumanize one person, we dehumanize ourselves. And you can see that just in the way, when you get in an argument with a stranger and suddenly you just feel like crap. And it's like, wait, what just happened? He was mean to me, but I got activated. And I think that's it's a message for all of us, is we have to start watching our behavior and being kinder both to ourselves and to the people in our lives and even strangers.
Would you be comfortable sharing some of your personal story? I understand if you're not comfortable doing that, but it could be very inspiring, and it's also a way to let people know out there that maybe have experienced some of the same experiences you have had, to understand that they're not alone.
Absolutely. So there's a thing in the world called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Quiz, and it was created by Robert Anda of the CDC and Vincent Folletti from Kaiser Permanente. This was a quiz created 20 years ago, and I highly encourage your listeners to go take the quiz to see the extent of childhood trauma. There are 10 categories of trauma. One is physical abuse, it's emotional abuse, sexual abuse, a parent or caregiver addicted to street drugs or alcohol, a parent or caregiver suicidal, depressed, or suicidal or depressed, sorry, emotional neglect, physical neglect, domestic violence, and a parent or caregiver in the family going to prison. I have 8 of those. And so when you have that many adverse childhood experiences, what happens is your body takes over, because there's a part of your brain called the amygdala, which is your it's like your smoke alarm. It tells your brain that something is wrong. Let's say road rage. Let's say somebody cuts you off in traffic. Next thing you know, you're screaming at the person in front of you. You're like livid, and you don't even know where that came from. Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from your amygdala. And what happens is the amygdala shuts down other parts of the body, like your prefrontal cortex, which is the place in your brain that monitors executive function. It has the wisdom, it has the moral authority. So when that part of your brain goes offline, you don't know what right or wrong is. All you want to do is keep your body safe. And so when you hear stories of policemen shooting somebody in the back 7 times when they're running away, he doesn't know that the threat is over. He's just doing what he can do to keep his body safe. And what I'm arguing is these wonderful men and women living in prison, that's the same thing that happened to their brain. And they're saying it's a moral choice. They're saying this is something that they're doing on purpose, that they're animals. And what happens is you actually go into the animal part of your brain when you're triggered, or when a traumatic event occurs. So what happened to me? So I was pardon.
Yeah.
I'm
The
sorry.
R complex.
What complex?
The R complex of the brain, which is kind of that the fight or flight, and
Yes,
just survive.
exactly.
Yeah.
The survival, fight, flight, or freeze. Exactly. And there's actually another piece called fawn, where you just kind of in America, we all dissociate when things get overwhelming. We're all culpable of wanting to just check out. And a lot of the things that are happening right now are really overwhelming. The pandemic, all of this racial divide, this political divide. We're all feeling like it's just too much. Why do you think Netflix is doing so well? Is because we all just want to check out. And the thing is, I think it's really time that we all start checking in, and we start learning about our traumas. We start learning about the abuses that we all experienced as children. I mean, in my research in prison, the men and women that I've surveyed, 70 to 80% of them have had 4 or more of those adverse childhood experiences that I mentioned, and 64% have had 6 or more. And as you increase the amount of adversity, being beaten every day, being sexually abused all the time, and emotional abuse and emotional neglect are actually the worst for your brain, for the way your brain develops. And if you look at the brain of a child that's been abused or neglected, the gray matter is actually smaller, and the synapses in the brain aren't firing as much as ones in a normal brain or a healthy brain, where a child is brought up in a loving, attachment-oriented environment. So, and my mother came from an abusive household, and she passed it on to me. And I have to tell you, I'm not going to blame my mother, because I know she did the best she could, but she lived in her amygdala, in that part of the lizard, the primal part of the brain. And she would beat me, and she would yell at me and tell me I was a piece of crap. And my father was an alcoholic. And anyway, there was a lot more adversity that I experienced. But from that, I lived in a state of anxiety all my life. I mean, I just was on edge all the time. You know, my son, he's 14 years old. He would drop something, and I would just flip a lid. I would just go off my rocker for no reason. And I'm like, who is this person so out of control? Well, that's me and my amygdala, you know, running the show. And so when your listeners hear this, think about the people that you know are, you know, if you see someone smoking, they're probably traumatized. If people go to the bar every night, there's something that they're not, there's some trauma or some event that really put them on edge. I mean, I had a glass of wine every night for, 10 years. So, I mean, I didn't feel like an alcoholic, but I felt like, I got to take some of this anxiety off. But even workaholism, people that work too much. And guess what? That's probably everybody listening to this broadcast, because that's just another way of not dealing with the anxiety and the depression that is just kind of, really damaging our society.
And then you have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, you just don't want to think about what you've been through. You're trying to stay in the moment, and you're compelled to do all these things and to work hard. But why do you think some people, people like you grew and developed, and you have this deep compassion, and you've been successful in your endeavors? How come some people go that route and others take a completely different route and end up in prisons?
It's a really great question. And one of the things that one of the clues I have is that I had one person who saw me, who saw my possibility, who saw that I had a purpose and a future. And when you have someone take an interest in you, it changes the way you feel about yourself, because suddenly they're reflecting possibility back to you. And what I'm finding, and what I've found in prison, is a lot of the men and women in there don't have that. Their parents are addicted to alcohol or street drugs. Their neighborhoods are riddled with violence. And also, it's kind of like they don't ever get a rest. Once in a while I could rest. And I think, and I lived in a safe neighborhood. I didn't have as much adversity as most of the people that are living in prison. They would go home, but they'd have to get home. And getting home was just as treacherous as being home. So there's no place for the body to just relax. And if you can't relax, you can't make plans for the future. All you see is right now, I'm hungry. I got to find some food. My mother didn't get food again. I have to go out and steal something, or see a friend if they'll give me some food. I mean, that kind of adversity doesn't allow the brain to rest and to go back into your prefrontal cortex, where you can start finding out who you are, what your dreams are. A lot of the people in prison don't have dreams. And I think that's such an important piece of mental health.
So you're dealing with mental health. And also, one of the things I wanted to point out, like people like me and you, we're educated, we're Caucasian, and so we're female, and in some ways that opens up a lot more doors. Whereas I was reading statistics that most of them, the majority of prisoners, have like 80% didn't graduate high school. Does that sound about right?
Yes, and I want to talk about that, because when you're traumatized and you're going to school, half of the kids are put into special ed classes. And remember, if you're a human, you're probably pretty genius. But when you're traumatized, you don't have access to memory, you don't have access to the prefrontal cortex, which allows for learning and processing and understanding. But if you're worried about survival, you're not thinking about 3+4. You're thinking about, oh my God, that guy behind me, he might have a gun in his backpack. I can't focus. And so, yes, they didn't finish high school because they couldn't learn. And then they think they're stupid. And it's a cycle that where they just, they give up hope on carrying through with the task. So, I want to say that everyone in prison is a genius. They just don't have access to their brains because they're trying to keep themselves alive. When I was in prison, I asked every guy that I was working with, I said, how many of you guys in here would be dead if you didn't go to prison? And every single man raised their hand. So what we're dealing with is it's survival. It's not about learning. It's not about having a childhood. Most of the guys never even played with crayons, the ones that I worked with. So we're talking about a whole different world that we don't even want to understand or look at. And it's time that we really start embracing. And as the radio said right before your show started, there's 24 million people that are hungry in the United States. And we're one of the richest countries in the world. So something is terribly wrong. And we got to make sure everyone goes to bed with a full belly, because that's the first thing. This Maslow's that hierarchy of needs. We got to make sure people are fed, because if you're not fed, you can't start thinking about getting a job or making plans for the future or saving money. None of that happens. And so we have to take care of the basic needs before people can really start functioning in society. And that's on us. That's not on the people that are, struggling right now just to pay the rent. I mean, this COVID thing has really magnified and multiplied the problems in our society.
Agreed. In your experience, in your opinion, are there prisoners that you've interacted with, like that maybe they have they're diagnosed as antisocial, malignant narcissists, or basically sociopaths or psychopaths? Do you find that those people may not be able to make it in the real world?
I think probably. I mean, I think there's some people with severe brain disorders, and they need to be away from society, but they don't need to be abused, and they don't need to be destroyed and humiliated and annihilated. I think there are some people, I would say 3 to 4% of the prison population needs to stay there. And I think they need to stay there and be taken really good care of, just like everybody else in society that we're abandoning. So I think once we start taking care of people as having value, we find our own value. We find our own purpose. And that's the thing. I mean, we're depressed out there. We're anxious. We have no sense of belonging or purpose. Well, you know what? Let's start finding the value in others. That's the best way. Gandhi has that quote, the best way to find yourself is in the service of others. And I have to tell you, the minute I walked into that prison, that changed my life. And I knew I was obligated to do something. It was like a spiritual mandate. It's like, you cannot just leave these men in there. They need some help because nobody's helping them. And so that's what I really wanted to bring. I want to bring attention to this, because we're saying these people are bad and flawed and irredeemable. Well, if that's true for them, that's true for us. And I also want to bring awareness to the accountability that prisons are asking the people that are incarcerated to be accountable. But there's no accountability for what's being done in prisons. Solitary confinement, it creates brain damage. It creates insanity. And we're doing that. We are actually creating unsafe streets, because 95% of the men and women coming out of prison, living in prison, will come out one day. And do we want them rehabilitated leaders and functioning men and women, or do we want them to come out and commit crimes again? So if we have a 65 to 70% recidivism rate, that's on the state. That's on the departments of corrections. That's incumbent on us to fix, because we're creating more crime and we're just adding to the system. So is that something that's incentivized? Do we want to keep people in prison? Do we want to keep people committing crimes? Or do we want to solve this problem so we can really get on and bring out the creative magnificence of everybody in this planet? Because if you're born, you are something else. I mean, just look at being alive is just incredible. And, we are ignoring that. We're denying that. And then, of course, I say we're denying that in ourselves, because what we do to others, it's the golden rule, right? What we do to one person, we do to all.
And I love this other quote that I think was on your website. Trauma is a fact of life, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence. And then also I want to get into statistics, because I have like 60 sheets of paper in front of me here. And I want to talk about like the percentage of nonviolent crimes. All these, most of them are like nonviolent crimes, and then about the drug abuse. And then after the break, we can also go into what Portland or Oregon is doing right now. So statistics.
Yeah, I don't really know actually the number of nonviolent crimes. I think it's 40% of people in prison are in for nonviolent crimes. I was reading last night about a juvenile, 14 years old, sentenced. Basically, they gave him a life sentence, 25 to life. He was in a robbery. He was robbing a barbecue place. Didn't really steal anything, but after a series of events, this is in Florida, he got 25 to life. Of course, he was African American. I mean, that's a violent crime, I understand, but if this was 50 years ago, they would have said, my God, that kid, what are we going to do with him? They wouldn't have sent him to basically a life sentence. And that's what
Was
happened.
Was he in an adult facility?
Yeah, well, they tried him as an adult as well, which is another crime. I mean, we're committing crimes all day and we're calling it justice. Well, that's not justice. That's, that's perversion. But as far as nonviolent crimes, a lot of them, a lot of people, drug addicts and, people that are insane, they're being incarcerated for, dozens of years. And I mean, it was a couple of weeks ago, a man got out after he had some marijuana. I mean, it was like a pound of marijuana. I don't know, but he was in like for 40 years. And I'm just questioning if this even makes sense to have our assets, these human assets that can create and bring goodness to the world. And we're hoarding them in these facilities that destroy. And so, yeah, and drug addicts, we know now that this is a brain disease. This isn't something, they're not bad people for choosing.
They have a disease.
Pardon?
They have a disease.
Exactly. And they're taking care of that. Most of them would be dead if they weren't addicts. So they're taking care of themselves the best way they know how. And until they address their trauma, until they have these modalities, which rich people get to take care of, but do poor people have access to somatic healing and yoga classes? I want to make sure they do, but no, right now the answer is no. And so they do what's closest, which is, drugs and alcohol. And it's not the smartest path, but it's the path that works. And there's a therapist, his name is Gabor Mate, and he says, good for you for being an addict because you're alive, you've taken care of yourself. And we don't like looking at addicts. We don't like looking at people that are homeless. We don't like looking at people that are poor and not together. We want everybody to be just bright and shiny. Well, the only way people are going to be bright and shiny is if they deal with their trauma. And, we have to start shifting the way we think about people that don't look all together. I walk down the street and I see a homeless man and I'm thinking, wow, he's just so messed up. But then I also think, what happened to that poor man? Why is he in the street? Why aren't we taking care of him? Why aren't we wrapping our arms around him and telling him it's okay? In Oregon prison is one of the Oregon prisons. They had a Norway exchange program where some of the officers and wardens went to Norway, which has like the best prison system. And some of the officers from Norway went to Oregon and they learned about a thing called normalization, where, you live in prison, but it's like a normal day, like you do in normal life. You wake up, you make your breakfast, you go to work, you come home, you wash your dishes, you do all those things. In prison, at least in the United States, all those tasks are basically taken away. All decisions are made for you. So that part of your brain doesn't get used. And when people come out from prison, they can't even go to the supermarket. They're so traumatized. They can't even, it's too many decisions. It's just, so so the man in the Oregon prison, he was insane.
We'll come to a break. I'm sorry about that. We'll get back to you just after this break. Okay, we're back, everybody. So I am sitting here with the lovely Miss Fritzi, and what she's done is she's created this compassion prisoner or prison project, and it's something that really appeals to me, and I think it's also starting to appeal to more and more Americans. There was just such a judgment around prisoners, and they should all be locked up till they die, and it was really pretty frightening. So let's just talk about some statistics. I found the ones I had found. And basically, one of the most disturbing ones was that 80% of the criminals that are incarcerated are in prison because of drugs, because of substance abuse, and that seems outdated because prohibition has never worked historically when it comes to prisoners and drug abuse. And here in Portland, Oregon, we passed Measure 110, and people think, oh, they've made all drugs legal. Oh my God, that's so awful. No, we did not make them legal. We decriminalized them. And we also give people the opportunity, of course, if you have enough drugs on you with the intent to sell, that is illegal and you will go to jail and you'll have to go to court. But for the others, you have the option of going into treatment centers, and we'll be saving millions and millions, for the cost of prisons, and we're actually going to be saving a lot of money with these treatment options. So that's something that I'm very excited to see what happens. And the other thing we were talking about, a child that had ended up into an adult facility, and children locked up in adult facilities are 8 times more likely to commit suicide, 5 times more likely to be sexually attacked, and twice as likely to be assaulted by staff than juveniles confined in a juvie center. So that's something I just wanted to touch on.
Oh, yeah. What we're doing to juveniles is unconscionable because the brain has not fully formed. Even insurance companies know that it takes the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully function until they're 25. If you look at any teenager, all teenagers are out of control. But if you're traumatized and you have no prefrontal cortex or a very, very limited prefrontal cortex, of course you're going to be committing crimes. Of course you're going to be getting into trouble. I was doing that myself. I'm not immune to this. The thing I wanted to also mention is Portugal decriminalized and I believe legalized all drugs. And what happened there, I don't have all the statistics, but I know people they could go and use drugs, but they would have to do it at these drug sites. But addiction went down, criminalization went down, drug crimes went way down, or basically were non-existent. And I think that's the model that Oregon was using. But I also wanted to get back to the Oregon story that I was telling of the man that was spreading feces on the wall every day. What they started doing is they started bringing the man into this blue room. And in the blue room, they would let him draw with crayons, and within like a day he stopped. He was yelling in his cell, and he was banging his head, and he had a big sore on the front of his head because he was banging his head so much. But after just one day of being treated kindly by these 2 officers, he stopped throwing feces, and he said to the officer, I want to go back to the blue room. He says, well, if you can control yourself and behave, we'll bring you back a lot. And basically kindness and consideration transformed that man within days. I mean, imagine if we just, and that's the name of our organization is called the Compassion Prison Project because it's not just about the prisoners, it's also about the correctional officers. The life
Mhm.
expectancy of a correctional officer is 58 to 59 years old, which presents as having 6 ACEs. There's so much stress and basically hypervigilance, which is toxic stress, which basically shuts down your organs. You're not able to function. And we need to bring wellness and help to the correctional officers as well. We need to take down the threat in prisons. And the only way to make a prison a safe environment is if you treat people with dignity and they have a reason to live and they have a reason to feel like they matter and that they have purpose. Because if you take that away from them, they have nothing to lose. And the most dangerous person in the world is someone who has nothing to lose. And I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead, Ella.
I was going to say, speaking about kind people and people that have hope, I have Jesse on the line, and he is a friend, and he's been incarcerated. So I wanted to invite him in to share his experiences and to show what a lovely human being he is, even though he spent time incarcerated. So hello, Jesse. He may have to unmute his phone.
Hey, Ella, I'm here.
Okay, great. So welcome to the show. And why don't you talk to us a little bit about incarceration and how you ended up so balanced and just you continued to grow spiritually. You made that decision in prison.
Yes, I really appreciate you guys educating me on your perspective. It's been so long since I've looked back on this experience, and I can tell you right now, I've got to get off the call at 2:00 my time. I got to go plow my dad's driveway. We've had so much snow up here, so I can tell you this. So when I started my prison time, right before that, I testified against the feds. So I got locked up, and 3.5 years of 5 total, and it was not fun, but in the beginning. But I met so many cool people. I was protected full time. And, all I could think about was, how can I enjoy this experience? How can I meet new people and make this a wonderful experience? So I got started right away. I didn't look at it as I'm locked up for no good reason. I looked at it as, how can I make my life better through this whole experience? So I'll give you an example. So I'm in 3 weeks, and I love these guys. Down in Purgatory, it's so hard to remember sometimes. St. George, Utah, which is Washington County. And I won the triathlon. I wasn't in good shape. I got up one morning. I'm like, I'm not doing that. And then I decided I'm just going to compete. So there's 5 events. I won 4 out of 5 events. My prize was a coffee can, Folgers. And I made a lot of new friends. And let me tell you, that was the beginning of my amazing 3.5-year experience in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember this guy named David Hughes. He was like 6'3". He looked like Sasquatch. So anybody that wanted to do me damage had to go through David Hughes first. I'm still in connection with that guy to this day. And so I don't think about stuff like that. I think about, how can we, like you guys are talking about, how can we present the public with the situations that make sense to them, so that there's no fear, like at least less fear. Like I said, for me, like, I live up in Starville, Wyoming. I've got to go plow my dad's driveway this afternoon. So I don't think about this stuff anymore.
Yeah, and one of the things people don't know about you is you do heartfelt or heart-centered meditations now. You try to help people and heal people. I just never knew. We just made all these assumptions that, these people are dangerous, and even if they're out, they could relapse into crime and they're bitter, but you are not like that. And I imagine there's more people just like you.
Well, and I'll tell you something else. I appreciate that, Ella. So I've done security down in Las Vegas and Salt Lake City, even in Seattle back in 2015. And I understand these people that are on the street. I make them warm and I feed them. And then any kind of credit I get, I turn over to my Father, Jesus Christ. Because I suck at it unless he's in control. And if you walk with these people in prison, like just one at a time, I mean, I dare you, go through it. You'll see what it's really like. And then you'll just give up judgment.
Don't judge a person until you walk a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jesse, thank you for giving. I thank you for giving some of your perspective, and I just appreciate you coming on the interview here. So I'm going to go back to our guests, and I'll let you go and take care of your father's driveway.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Love you, Jesse. Speak to you soon. Okay. Bye. Okay, so Fritzi, let's talk about solutions and your films. I mean, I was so moved by the film. I guess it was a promotional video, and you saw the prisoners in a circle. And can you share with the listeners what some of those questions were?
Well, they're basically the 10 things that I listed in the beginning. But I would say if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid you might be physically hurt, step inside the circle. And then if you look in that circle, I would say for that question, probably 85% of the men took a step. And then we kept asking questions. Some of the questions we asked more questions than just the 10 ACE questions. One of the most significant questions we also asked was your head ever bashed or banged, or, basically, do you have TBI? Do you have traumatic brain injury? And I would say 85% of the men took a step for that question. And, I've been listening to neurologists and brain scientists and ask any football player who's suffered a traumatic brain injury. Can he think? Can he think clearly? Is he able to make a good decision? And the answer is no. When you have a damaged brain, you need to get help and you need to fix that damaged brain. And a lot of these kids and men and women living in prison had their heads bashed before prison and definitely while they're in prison. And so we really need to start taking care of the physical brain as well as the mental health of the men and women living in prison. We heal their brains and we heal society, and that's just an equation that makes sense. And I also want to just say we also need to bring compassion and let them feel what love feels like, because a lot of these men and women grew up with mothers that were drug addicts, fathers that were abusive, and they were also, as we know, they were also abused as children, but they don't have a sense what love feels like. They don't understand what compassion is. If you look at the landing page of our website at compassionprisonproject.org, there is a man I'm staring at. His name is Richard. And he said, I stared at him probably for about 30 minutes. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just here for you. This is what love feels like." He says, "This feels so weird. I don't know what to do with this." And it was quite a moment for the both of us, because it's like, I don't know, it was like one of those cosmic moments where something has happened. And he actually joined our class at Compassion Prison Project. And I came to understand the amount of abuse that he suffered was just unconscionable. His father just would beat him just for, just for being alive, basically. And these are little children. These are little spirits. These are little, angels on earth that we're just destroying. And, if you have an angel at home, see that angel. Don't see him as something, someone who's yelling or annoying or a pain in the neck. That's an angel. That's our future. And we want to build a good future. We want to build a good future for our children and for the planet. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really take a step back and seeing what kind of violence we are putting into the world. And that includes the violence that we're meting out at prisons. We can no longer just stand idly by and know that today there's 80,000 people plus in solitary confinement. That's my tax dollars paying to torture somebody and ruin their lives. I'm paying for that. And I don't think that's what we should be doing anymore. I think we should really say, wait a second. I mean, first of all, do no harm, right? That's the Hippocratic Oath that all doctors say. Well, I think all humans should say it. I don't think it just should apply. I think, doctors, lawyers, judges, politicians, people that working in prison, do no harm. We need to do no harm anymore. And that means, no sarcasm and let's just really take each other seriously and respectfully and honor the human that we are instead of.
I saw a picture. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I saw a picture of the man who was just looking into your eyes with such warmth. And I know people respond to compassion. And it was beautiful because I thought, oh, these guys are going to be like tough guys. They're not going to be interested in doing this. And I saw such an openness from the people that were there that were working with you.
Yes. Well, Victor Forte, one of the men that speaks in the film about his mother trying to flush him down the toilet when he was born. I mean, imagine coming into the world and that's what's happening. And you're not being cuddled by your mother. Anyway, Victor's probably about 6'5", 6'6", and 350 pounds. He's the gentlest soul I've ever met. I mean, yes, some of the people in prison have done terrible things, but we all have done terrible things. So it's hypocritical to say, hey, they did worse things, so they deserve it. But, I drove home drunk and put in danger, my society. I did that. And I know millions and millions of people have done that, but we weren't caught. So we don't have to serve time. But I put my community in danger and I'm not paying the price for that. And so we have to really think about what is the price? What is the price that we really need people to pay? And I think people do need a timeout. I don't think it should be in a prison. I think it should be in a healing center or a community center. There are other ways to have people stop their bad behavior, because if you've committed a crime, 99% is there's a traumatic past involved or a trauma involved. And so that's the skew, that's the lens that we're putting on this problem, is that trauma is criminal. It creates criminals. It also creates dysfunction in the world. And so we need to raise awareness about ACEs. People, please go to the website and take the ACE test, compassionprisonproject.org. Learn about your own ACEs, but then also learn about the ACEs of the men and women living in prison. Our research says, and I said, 98% of the people in prison have had at least one ACE, whereas in the United States, 64% have had at least one ACE. So the amount of adversity that these men and women have endured it's off the charts. And like you said, walk a mile in their shoes, and you'd say, yeah, I'd probably do the exact same thing that they did, because they had to survive, and this is what they were led to do.
Yeah, and that's also what they knew in the environments that they grew up in. It's just so sad. And I bring this up a lot because I did learn a lot. I fostered kids. Now I took older kids oftentimes that suffered horrible abuse. And it's just really sad. I had a son that actually adopted, and he still ended up in the system. Both his parents were in the system, but he'd been so traumatized, and he had all this internal anger that he didn't want to acknowledge. But I love him anyways, and I support him. And he's trying to get, he's out and he's trying to get his life back together. And, he always has us. And so one of the things I want to talk about, I love ACLU. And so they've come up with policy priorities for prison reform. And number one is reduction in incarceration, which kind of leads me to privatization of, some of these for-profit prisons. They make money off having prisoners. Do you want to say a quick thing to that?
Yes, and the cost savings that they, in order to make money, they have to save money, right? So the food, the quality of food, one of the things you need to thrive and survive in society is to have food that's nutritious and actually gives your body good energy. And the kinds of foods that private prisons serve you wouldn't serve it to an I don't even want to say a dog, because I would never serve something like that to my dog. I would never serve that to a pig. It's like, this is not okay. And to profit off of a human, that's basically that's what we did when there was slavery, which, by the way, in the 13th Amendment, there is a provision for slavery that we can have slaves if they're incarcerated. So right now, there's 2.2 million people in prison. So we have essentially 2.2 million slaves working for us. And then if you talk about migrant workers, you would probably add that to the equation. But I'm talking about prison. So, I mean, is it okay that we have slaves in the United States? Is that something that, as an evolved nation, as a leading nation, that, it's okay? We say it's okay to have slaves. What does that say to other countries? That condones behavior for dictators and others to do North Korea. I mean, what is that saying? So I really think we need to get the provision of slavery out. It says, the 13th Amendment says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So that needs to go out. We need to get that phrase out. And I think we need to do it this year.
Yep, just takes an amendment.
Yeah, it takes an amendment and some awareness and some consideration that we can no longer pay 8 cents to a man who spent an hour in the field picking cotton, literally picking cotton in Louisiana or in Alabama. They're picking cotton for 8 cents an hour. That's basically slavery. And that's what we said in 1865, that was not acceptable. So why are we
just have a few more minutes. I'm so sorry to interrupt you again, but what can people do to get involved? How can we, I really want to try and work on a bill proposal with people, just trying to maybe amend that, or maybe to, like we have in Oregon here, just maybe offer treatment versus imprisonment. What do you think? And how can they get involved with your organization?
Well, to get involved with our organization, please go to our website at compassionprisonproject.org and make sure to watch the video, Step Inside the Circle, and the other video we put up there, Honor Yard, and really start understanding the effects of trauma. Take the ACE test and understand the effects of trauma on the brain, body, and spirit, and really look at your own trauma, because if you can heal, you can help heal the rest of the world. And also, we have a volunteer place, and if you want to donate, that would be amazing. And also find out how many prisons are in your state. Find out how many jails are in your state. What is the temperature of the DA? Is he really aggressive in making sure everybody goes to jail, or is he really getting some sense into the system so that people aren't going to jail for trumped up charges and enhancements? I mean, that's mass incarceration. But start taking an interest in your own, this is Oregon, which is, thank God for Colette Peters. She's a great leader in Oregon. But, take an interest in what's going on in your prison. Maybe we need to help the correctional officers more. Maybe we need to do a support group for them. Maybe we need to, when the prison's open, let's get some volunteers in there. We're doing circles. We're training people to do circles. Come to us and we'll teach you how to do these circles. And, and also write letters to people in prison. We have a letter writing campaign.
Great idea. Mhm. Are you in Oregon?
No, I'm in Los Angeles, and we
Okay.
have 35 prisons, and our prison system needs an overhaul, and that's one of the things I'm working on. But there's 1,833 prisons, so there's a lot of work ahead of us for us. But we're on
Mhm.
it. We're creating a trauma talk series that we would like all prisons to present on their internal television network for the people in prison, and we're creating a workbook about trauma and self-love and forgiveness, and it should be ready in the next couple of months. So we also need a lot of donations to get those workbooks into every prison. We want each workbook costs about $15, and we want every single person that is living in prison needs to have that workbook so they can work on themselves, work on their trauma. There's all these healing modalities, somatic healing, yoga poses, and other ways, and meditation practices, other ways to take the violence that's in our system and get in relationship to it. And I urge your guests to also do that for themselves.
Well, thank you so much. We just have a few seconds. It's been a really special interview, and you're so inspirational to me, and I think I want to get involved myself, maybe letter writing and something to that capacity.